Alright, welcome brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to the new Black Media. Today's broadcast is about Michael German, who is a former federal agent who spent years infiltrating white supremacist groups. And in so many words, he asked the question, where is the FBI? Now, when you ask that question, keep in mind that the FBI has announced that their highest threat to our homeland is black identity extremists. Even though they dreamed up that name, even though they dreamed up that terminology, and even though they have no evidence whatsoever of such an existence of such a group, or can name any person or people associated with it, Michael German is asking the question, after infiltrating white supremacist groups for years as a former federal agent, he's asking, where is the FBI? That's a very good question. So, late in 2017, ProPublica began writing about a California white supremacist group called Rise Above Movement. Its members had been involved in violent clashes at rallies in Charlottesville, Virginia, and several cities in California. They were proud of their violent handiwork, sharing videos on the internet and recruiting more members. Our first article was entitled, Racist, Violent, Unpunished, a White Hate Group's Campaign of Menace. More articles followed, and another neo-Nazi group, Atomwaffen Division, was exposed. Michael German, a former federal agent who spent years infiltrating white supremacist groups, said the work of the groups constituted organized criminal activity. And he asked in so many words, where is the FBI? Federal authorities wound up arresting 8 members of the Rise Above movement, and 5 of them have since pleaded guilty to federal riot charges. This summer, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified that over the last 9 months, the Bureau's domestic terrorism investigations had led to 90 arrests, many of them involving white supremacists. And in recent weeks, there have been additional arrests. A Las Vegas man said to be affiliated with Atomwaffen, and a young man in Chicago affiliated with Patriot Front, another white supremacist group. The activity concerning the threat of white racists has gone beyond arrests. There have been a variety of proposals making their way through Congress aimed at creating federal criminal statutes that might make prosecuting domestic terrorism threats more effective. The FBI Agents Association has supported new laws. We went back to German, a fellow with the Brennan Center for Justice, Liberty, and National Security Program, and the author of the forthcoming book, Disrupt, Discredit, and Divide: How the New FBI Damages Democracy, to inquire about the significance of the seeming burst of enforcement efforts. The FBI, made aware of German's observations and arguments, declined to comment, but it provided a link to recent testimony by Bureau officials before Congress. First, the arrest of several white nationalists allegedly planning acts of violence since the El Paso attack demonstrate beyond question that the FBI has all the authority it needs to act proactively against white supremacist violence. Claims from the FBI Agents Association and other current and former Justice Department officials that the government needs new laws to target this violence are false. I worked successful domestic terrorism undercover operations against white supremacists in the 1990s, and no one ever suggested we didn't have all the authority we needed. Now remember, keep in mind, this is a former federal agent. It is hard to know if these arrests mark a new increase in attention to far-right violence because the Justice Department doesn't keep reliable data about how many investigations and prosecutions it conducts against white supremacists. Now the question is, why don't they keep reliable data on how many investigations and prosecutions it conducts against these white supremacists? That's a good question. Is it because we have a system that is ran by white supremacists? That begs the question. It sometimes categorizes them as domestic terrorism, other times as hate groups or even gang crimes, obscuring the true scope of violence they inflict on our society. And since the Justice Department defers the investigation and prosecution of hate crimes to state and local law enforcement, which is a huge, major problem that's very problematic, the FBI doesn't even know how many people white supremacists kill each year. So basically, we're unraveling a lot of the key issues that's a problem, and yet our elected officials and the people in power do nothing about these things. So when we hear from the white racists come to our channels giving us lip service, this is why we reject them. But I digress. The Justice Department and FBI deprioritize the investigation and prosecution of far-right violence as a matter of policy, not a lack of authority. These recent cases are a result of increased public pressure to do something about these crimes. But the Justice Department and FBI have done nothing to amend their policies that deprioritize the investigation of white supremacist crimes. Well, as a side note, that's because they're too focused on a supposed and alleged black identity extremist who they claim is a bigger threat, but yet they have no evidence of it. But because they're so focused in that direction, they are failing to protect our nation and our country and our citizens against these menaces of society. But I digress. Maintaining public pressure and focusing on changing the biases that drive these policies is essential to forcing a change in priorities at these agencies. Many researchers have suggested that the internet fuels white nationalist violence, and therefore suppression of these online communities is necessary. But white supremacists have been killing people in this country for more than 100 years before the internet was created. They use the internet more to communicate today than 20 years ago, just like all the rest of us do. But that doesn't mean there's more violence. In fact, as the recent cases suggest, internet communications make them far easier to track and infiltrate. So it is more a boost to law enforcement more than to violent militants. But mass monitoring of social media for clues isn't an effective strategy, as there are far more people expressing racist ideas online than committing violence. And let me just say, that's true. The FBI would be very busy chasing down false leads, which would only dull the response. Instead, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies should work from reasonable criminal predicates. Where there is objectively credible evidence that someone is planning to do harm, they should act. Congress shouldn't pass broad new laws or stiffer penalties, as there are already dozens of federal statutes outlawing domestic terrorism, hate crimes, and organized violent crime that carry significant sentences. These are bills that demand better data collection by the Justice Department, which would reveal where counterterrorism resources should be devoted and where they're being wasted. This is a better approach. Proper policies can't be developed without a better understanding of the crime problem. In the meantime, Congress should explore mechanisms to fund and implement community-led restorative justice practices that would redress the communal injuries hate crimes are designed to inflict. White supremacists try to intimidate and marginalize the communities they attack. Making sure these communities are cared for, protected, and supported after an attack frustrates that goal. More policing isn't always the right answer, and certainly not the only one. Well, I'm going to skip all the way down and just say this. I think the violence in Charlottesville was a wake-up call for everyone. The media finally recognized that white supremacists were engaging in terrorism too. And that's why you saw the high level of headlines calling out white supremacists. The level of violence these far-right groups inflict has been persistent over time, but studies show that the media gave terrorist acts perpetuated by Muslims 350% more coverage than violence committed by their own or by other terrorists, namely white supremacists. The increased reporting post-Charlottesville eventually caused policy makers to take notice, which in turn compelled the FBI and Justice Department to begin to take these crimes more seriously. The media coverage drives public perception, which causes policymakers to act. It remains to be seen whether they react in a way that improves the situation and builds a more inclusive society, or divides and conquers, or makes it worse by giving law enforcement broad powers to continue targeting marginalized communities, namely black people, agitating for civil rights and changes in government policies. Well, family, there was a segment of this article that obviously I skipped for good reason. I will leave the link in the description for you to look over yourself if you're interested in more of this information, but I just find this a great revelation that Michael German, this former federal agent who spent these years infiltrating white supremacist groups, has come forward and has asked the right question, namely, where is the FBI? And like I stated before, and I'll say it again, they were too focused on a fantasized, made-up group called the Black Identity Extremists, and that was namely to target black Americans, foundational black Americans. This is the New Black Media. Thanks for listening.